Okay. You know what? The other thing, Eric, is that you deal occasionally with utilities, and I wonder if utilities kind of rise to something like the level of a quasi-governmental thing. So utilities and rights of way, damaging trees, removing trees that get homeowners or adjacent property owners in a twist.
Right, and I'm on a learning curve right now with that, and involved in a case right now where I'm learning, okay, does the utility writes, for instance, their own requirements for pruning around utility lines that then they submit to the Public Utility Commission in Pennsylvania. And you have multiple different utilities that are all working and doing line clearance in Pennsylvania, but they don't all, apparently, they don't all apply to a standard that the PUC puts out to them. It's the reverse. They tell the PUC what standards they want to prune to and they want to hold their subcontractors to. And then the PUC, I believe, looks at it where they say, we're going to look back at your 5-year records and see how many outages you have per linear mile. And as you meet or don't meet these standards, then we're going to tell you we want you to change how you do that.
And interesting, if you think about that, their standard isn't also who's getting hurt or what property damage is occurring. It's more like about outages.
Yes.
So those regulations may arguably not even be for purposes of protecting people. The biggest thing they're not going to have governmental immunity. They're not going to have sovereign immunity, but they may say, like the auto manufacturers have said historically, to the extent that we're regulated and we meet those regulations, then you can't sue us separately. So if Department of Transportation says this is the way you have to build the safety device, you can't sue me for doing it the way that the federal government has required me to do it. And these guys are going to say, well, we meet the PUC's guidelines, we've submitted it to them, but they're not going to get an immunity from that. It's just going to be a standard of care. The danger for them, of course, is if they want to point that out as a standard of care, then it becomes an easy case if they've deviated from it.
Right.
All right, Karl Rominger's with us. So is Eric Vorodi from About Trees Consulting. And in the few minutes we have left, we touched on a topic that's kind of interesting to me, a side issue, and it's certainly not the order of magnitude that folks at the Jersey Shore and other places have experienced, but the water issue. You mentioned about townships and boroughs being forced to keep water from, running onto your property. I know you've handled this on your show before, but neighbors downspout kind of, draining onto your property. I know this whole concept of the common enemy,
right?
But once again,
water's the common enemy, and everybody needs to get it off their land is the theory, and do what you may to get it off your land. But you can't artificially channel or direct it to the other guy's land. So the way I describe it is, if I build a parking lot and forget about all the environmental regulations, because we're just dealing with the common law water issues, and all the water just runs off the parking lot, off the four corners and on everybody else's land and no longer permeates into the ground. That's their problem, not mine. But if I build a drain in the middle of the parking lot and I shoot it out one of the sides and it then comes out onto your land as an artificially channeled bundle of water, it will create a little furrow and maybe a big gully someday. For that, you can seek recourse because I can't channel the water in a way that becomes destructive to you. These cases are usually more complicated than that because, as you know, water usually doesn't come from one source. So, I'm thinking of a case years ago we had where the farmer decided to turn the corn rows a different direction than he ever had. Instead of going across the grain of the land, he went up and down. Nobody knows why, but that particular year he did, and then all the water was coming off his field in a much different way, obviously. Then the neighbor across the street dug a channel to put it out into a township ditch to deal with his water, which is all fine. And then the township ditch took all the water and went down somebody else's house, and that's where it overflowed and created a valley through this guy's yard overnight after the first big rainstorm. And so who's responsible, right? Because you go all the way back to the cornfield and say, just turn your rows around. You can go to the other neighbor and say, well, you're the one who set it to the township ditch, but he's going to say, hey, I'm entitled to do that. That's what that ditch is there for.
So this sounds to me like something where talking to your neighbor and kind of pushing it back up the line didn't work out.
Well, ultimately, we resolved it. The township helped out a little bit, got some equipment put in to fix this, and then the the farm cooperative people got hold of the farmer. It turned out what had happened is the son had come back to the farm and had never really farmed, and I guess nobody gave him the memo on soil erosion. So they fixed it.
Well, you've been here before, but explain people what it is that you do, Eric, with About Trees Consulting.
It's hard to do, but briefly, I'm a consulting arborist. So unlike a guy with a big truck and a chipper, I work with a pen.
A contractor, yeah.
Right. I work with a pen and a clipboard and help people, whether both residential, commercial, insurance, attorneys, anybody that needs expertise in the realm of trees, I help them.
And you subscribe to this exorbitant value of trees, and I'm just kind of yanking your chain because I know I can do that.
No, I certainly end up on both sides of the issue all the time, and I try and look down the middle and say what's a reasonable approach to this. But oftentimes you're dealing with somebody who either wants the moon and the stars, or on the other side doesn't want to compensate you at all for the value of that tree.
And when you're doing that, just describe a little bit briefly the kind of some of the terms that you might use. We're talking about cost of cure and things like that. What are some of the schemes that you use? I know this is a short time to do that.
Well, just because it came up before, replacement value. When somebody says, I want that tree replaced, well, there is a method of appraisal called replacement value method, but that's used when you have a tree that is of such a size that it could normally be gone out, sourced, purchased, and installed without extraordinary measures. And in our industry, a most common landscape size tree would be a 2 to 2.5 inch caliper tree, 2 to 2.5 inch caliper trunk. You could go so far as to say that a 3 or 4, maybe even a 5 inch caliper tree could easily be sourced and installed without extraordinary measures. But once you get beyond that, now you're talking about specialized equipment, big, gigantic, heavy root balls that weigh multiple tons, and so on and so forth. And now you can't claim that would easily be installed with normal methods, so you have to switch methods, and then we might use the trunk formula method to extrapolate up from the value of a small tree up to the value of a larger tree. And of course, in every case, once you've extrapolated up, then you depreciate back down based on factors that are involved in that particular case.
And I know you have more information about this sort of thing and what you do at your website. Tell folks about how to find out more.
Abouttrees.net. Go on there, and it's an easy site to navigate, and you'll find lots of things of interest there.
So, Karl, I know that you handle these kind of questions on your show from time to time,
Right.
just because you're kind of a generalist. But honestly, does your office handle these? Do you like this sort of stuff coming through your office?
Yeah, well, I've always liked land use cases, right-of-ways. We get a lot of right-of-way work, a lot
Sure.
of water work. We do get the occasional tree case. I find, though, that most of the tree cases we get are really just neighbor disputes that need some moderation or mediation. And again, I can't count the number of times when the question goes, did you call your neighbor and ask them if they would help with this? And they go, well, no, not yet. You're like, well, why'd you call me first? Get on good terms with your neighbor.
So when people need that call to bounce it back, how do the folks get a hold of you?
They can go to romingerlaw.com, ROMINGER, or just call our office at 241-6070.
All right, and listen to Karl Rominger here on Saturday's weekend appointment.
Yes.
Thanks so much for coming in today. Eric Vorodi from About Trees Consulting, Karl Rominger. We were talking about tree issues in law, so if you have any questions further about that, check out both of their websites. And by the way, you can find out some of my remarks about that at my blog at harrisburgmagazine.com.